Okay. All right, so JavaScript. All right. So JavaScript solved a problem that we soon came to realize when the web got started, that there was no way to dynamically generate dynamic content, and there were several strategies that were explored. One of them was to have perhaps the browser download some executable from the server and run it on your browser, right? And there were several versions of that, right? There were Java applets, right? That you gave it a particular rectangle, and they would be able to execute within that. You have a ActiveX. You had Flash. There were a lot of attempts at solving that problem, right? Of having some dynamic content as a user would be able to dynamically interact and then it responds. One of the more successful ones was JavaScript. JavaScript allowed a programming language to be able to manipulate the content. At the beginning was very, very modest. It was mostly used for validating input as user typed or submitted some forms, and then the JavaScript would validate and make sure that you were actually providing a date or an integer and then it would pop up some kind of alert or give you some feedback telling you that there was something wrong or whatnot. There was also, it became very popular for animation and doing lots of marketing things. Today has become much more important, right? Ever since we have been demanding more and more of our applications and that they be more responsive to our needs. That we're expecting that these web pages behave very much like our desktop applications behave, right? And so applications have become much more complex, and so we have had to create libraries to help us deal with this complexity. But nevertheless, let's talk about JavaScript in the raw, right? In the raw. So the script tag allows you to embed inside of an HTML page, allows you to embed executable code, right? That in this case, for instance, is a very simple alert and just pops up that message. So let's go to where we were last week, and let's create maybe a directory here where we can play around with jQuery and JavaScript in general. So JavaScript. And let's create maybe an index file here, index.html, and in here let's have HTML and maybe head here and maybe a body, so body, and in here we'll say h1 welcome to JavaScript, and let's navigate there, see where we are. So this is JavaScript. Did I misspell it? JavaScript. Is that misspelled? That doesn't look misspelled. Did I put it in the right place? Well, JavaScript. Index.html. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so we're there. So let's just copy just a couple of silly examples from here, like this one. So in the head, copy. Here, there we go. And if we just refresh that page, we have the alert come up. The one thing to point out, notice that the content hasn't rendered yet. All right, so that alert it blocked the execution, right? And the browser was not allowed to continue, right, to parse the rest of the document. That's very important, right? Meaning that a JavaScript file or executable, if it takes too long to do whatever it needs to do, right? It might block the browser from continuing to interpret the page, right? So that's very important. We might not want that, right? Especially if it's a very dynamic page. It might take a while for the browser to interpret and run your JavaScript before it even renders anything for the user. Right? So oftentimes you'll find that to avoid that, developers will, instead of putting it where it's supposed to go, so JavaScript is supposed to, syntactically, it's supposed to be inside of the head tag, right? But often developers will instead put it at the end of the body. We'll put it at the end of the body to guarantee that the browser has at least parsed something of the content, shown something to the user before it gets to the JavaScript. Make sense? Notice that this is interpret. Oh wait, what? All right, so it's not long running. It's not blocking. I don't have any long running function that is running. Why is it not rendering that though? All right. Anyway, I'd like to show you the same thing with jQuery in a minute. So yeah, so oftentimes it's moved to the bottom. Another thing that alert does is just prints out to as a pop-up. Oftentimes, developers will also render content not as an alert, but instead to a console. So the console is is part of the browser, right? That can show the developer any running piece of content. So, for instance, if we refresh, notice that it doesn't alert anything, but it's available at the inspector, right? We can click on the inspector, and we can see in the console anything that we are printing to the console. So this is very useful for debugging purposes, right? So you can print out any content here. Also available here in the inspector is the actual DOM, right? This is this here is a representation of what the browser, as they parse the static content, the HTML, it parsed it and it generated this object representation, right? It created nodes that hierarchically break up the application like this. So this is the top level HTML node with two children nodes, right? The head node and the body node. And the body node having two children of its own, right? The h1 and the script. Okay. The browser is responsible for parsing, generating this document object model. This is called the DOM. And then, once it has the DOM, then it's responsible for rendering each one of these nodes into a rectangle, right, with actual content, right, establishing areas that it renders. For instance. Here it's pointing out, what portion of the screen is associated with what part of the DOM, right? And the beauty of JavaScript is that it can programmatically grab a hold of these elements, right, and manipulate them. Change from H1 to H2, change the content from welcome to goodbye, or add more content dynamically. And do all cool things dynamically. Yes? So something that used to be static, now it can become dynamic. All right. Let's keep going. So here's another thing that it can dynamically do. It can, for instance, once it's done the console, it can grab it can grab hold of the actual DOM element, right? Of that document. So document is a reference to that DOM. Okay, and then you can manipulate it. You say, well, I want to write to it, right? I want to write. I could overwrite. I could append to the content that's already there, right? And I can say, explicitly what content I want to display. So if we run that. I guess I'll put this outside so I can. Okay, notice that it writes to the document. So the previous script. So this was parsed. The browser parsed this h1 and it rendered this content. And when it got to the script, it then wrote, kept writing to the DOM element, to DOM writing hello world. Now hello world. Notice that this is just a static content. Notice that this is what's rendered here. See this hello world? It wasn't there before. Right? This was added by this document.write. See that? It could have written something else. It could have written h2, hello world. So we run it. Notice that it renders it as an h2. And there it is. This h2 element was parsed by the browser and interpreted as an h2 element, right? And it rendered correctly. And this was dynamically added by the script. It wasn't there explicitly. Make sense? Everybody okay? All right, awesome. All right, so let's keep going. We can also change things that are already there. Right. So, for instance, if our HTML, if this h1 here had an ID called hello, what JavaScript could do is says, hey, go grab me that element whose ID is XYZ, right, and change its content to something else. So where it used to say welcome to JavaScript, right? So if we go here and we refresh, notice it says welcome to JavaScript. We could change it so that instead. So let's grab that. And let's change it. Let's add it right here. It says, hey, document, go fetch me an element that is already in the document and whose ID is hello. There it is, hello. And we can change its inner HTML, right? Its inner HTML, meaning whatever's inside the element, whatever's inside there, right? Replace whatever the content is with something else. Here we are changing it to, let's say, welcome to JavaScript. We'll change it to, what maybe welcome to CS5610. Right. So we'll go back and refresh. Notice that it says welcome to CS5610. And in the DOM, notice that we have no recollection that this was ever, right, welcome to JavaScript. See that? Right, it completely replaced its content to be this new content there dynamically. What else? Yeah. So this element, this function here, document.getElementById, is very similar to APIs that can dynamically manipulate XML. Right. If you've ever played around with XML documents, you will recall many of these functions, right, that allow you to navigate through an XML document, right? These are inspired, right? This API is inspired by regular XML parsing, XML manipulation. Okay, right. So we have ID. We just looked at that example. So we were able to retrieve the element by ID. We can also change it. We can also perhaps assign the element first. Let's see. Instead of changing its content, we can say document dot get element by ID, hello, right? And maybe assign it to a local variable, hello, right? And then manipulate it. So maybe we can say hello dot inner HTML. In HTML to welcome to webdev. Right? Oops, that's not it. Yeah, welcome to webdev. Or we can change the elements. The elements once you have it in a local variable, it has attributes such as style, and style is an object that allows you to manipulate the style of the element. So, for instance, we can say hello .style .color. You can change it to red. So it changes to red, right? Or you can also change the font size to be something else. So it'll be, for instance, hello.style.font size. Oops, font size to be 25 pixels. I don't know how big that is. Okay, it just made it a little smaller. Make sense? All right, so we can manipulate that dynamically. Excellent. Let's see. We can hide things by changing the display attribute, very much like we would do if we were styling it right here in the inspector. Notice that in the inspector, it shows you as you select any element, it shows you what the styles are. Right? Notice that here's the style attribute that we've been manipulating dynamically, and it's there. There it is. The color, we changed it to red dynamically. The font size also, we changed it to 25. We can hide it by changing the display to say none, and it's gone, right? Or the default is block, so it'll be there. Or inline as well. So we can change it to none dynamically by just saying hello.style .display none. So that we can dynamically notice that if this was a little faster, you would see a flash for a second as it's added to the DOM first, right, and then removed right after, very quickly afterward. And notice as the styling was changed dynamically. Excellent. Let's see what else. You can also display dates. So here's today, and you can maybe display the day right after it, right after the content. There it is. So today's the month 8. Wait, it isn't, right? I think it's 0-based. Yeah. So be careful, right? It's 0-based, right? So September is 8. Or you can get the full year. And render that. So yeah, so it's 2018. So I guess that's not 0-based. What else? You can write arrays and write them as scores. Let's see. So that's that renders it. There it is. So it automatically parses it as a comma-separated list of values. Let's see. What else? Or you can calculate things, right, like you would expect in a regular programming language. You can iterate, and you have your for loops, and calculating the average, and then displaying the total average. So there's my total, 324, and the average is 81. All right, so you get the idea, right? You can display this dynamically. Notice that this is a nicer way of displaying as a UL. So here's our first example on using dynamic content, that we can generate dynamic line items, dynamic tables, dynamic anything, right? We can generate these dynamic. So here's an opening of the UL elements, right? Iterating over the scores. One thing to point out here, notice this for loop, right? We're declaring the I inside of the for loop, and notice this in Java, the way you would interpret this is that I would have the value of each one of the scores, all right? So in the first iteration, I might be 90, right? Then 89, then 78, then 67. I guess the student has been getting worse and worse. But in JavaScript, actually, I is not those values. I is just going to be a counter, right? It's just going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So careful there. So it's just the index, right? So it's don't confuse it the way Java does it, right? So then to retrieve each one of the scores, then it would be score sub I, right? Okay. So here we are just displaying a UL, and then we are just adding each one of the scores, scores in the sub I, and then closing the LI. Right. So if we render that, we refresh it, is way at the bottom. There it is, all the values in there in the array. Okay. So the same thing with tables. We can use we can do something similar with the table. But here we're doing something different. Notice that what we're doing before we were document writing as we went, right? Here we are, we wrote the UL, then we wrote the LI one at a time, and then we wrote the UL at the bottom to close it. Yes? Alternatively, we can just build a string as we go, right? We have the table. We open up a string with table. Then we append the table row. We append the columns. We append each row to the table, right? And once we have the entire, we close the table as a string. Now we have a long, really, really long string, right, with the entire table all compiled into the string. Now we write the entire string to the document, and that has the same effect. Okay, as we'll see later on, Angular and React does similar things, right? They have a compile function, right, that allows you to actually compile this down to whatever this is going to be written to the DOM, all right? But here's just a snippet of what it might look like. So let's copy that. So let's put it at the end. So the same scores, but we are displaying it using a table instead. Okay, there it is. So we're opening the table, we're opening the row, we're creating the first column, we're appending the scores, we're closing the column, and then that column is being appended to the row. We open a new column with the actual value. We append the column to the row, and then we close the row, and we append the entire row to the table, and then finally we close the table as we go. So this, the way this renders, is as a table you would expect, and that is a table, really, believe me. Maybe I should put here border equal 1. There we go. There it is. It is a table. All right. Excellent. Other things that JavaScript allows us to do is to declare event handlers, right? To handle things such as clicking or dragging or moving the mouse or whatever, right? So that as the user interacts with the user interface, we can respond to it. So let's declare here a button, maybe at the end. So perhaps here we create a new button. And then declare a function that can handle that. All right. So you can have multiple script elements, right? And here the script elements that we are adding, they're embedded inside of the document, right? So here are script elements with some functions, some for loops above there, right? More commonly, we would have a JavaScript living in separate files, right? And we would then load them from here. It's actually considered bad practice to embed JavaScript inside of your HTML, right? It's much more appropriate to have them separate. We'll do that in a minute. So anyway, so let's see. So here we declared a button down here that if we click on it, it pops up that alert. So the way this works is that onClick is an attribute that allows you to bind events on any element. Here we're binding it on the button, but you can bind it on a paragraph, you can bind it on a header, you can bind it on a div, you can bind it on anything, right? So you can make anything clickable. But more commonly, you make a button clickable. And here we're saying that if there is an onClick event, to execute whatever's inside the brackets, so inside of the quotes. In this case is to invoke the function say hello, right? And say hello is down here, which just pops up an alert. Okay, so that's an easy one.